Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me today is a guest that I've been wanting to get. He and I had been playing a schedule chasing tag, but Dick Wingate, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jesse, great to be here. Sorry it's taken so long, but I'm really happy to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, I am really looking forward to it, but let's start out with tell my audience a little bit about yourself. What's your elevator pitch?
The music and tech lifer, the tech part came in the last part of my career, but I grew up just obsessed with what was on the radio from the age of about 10. And I had music in my blood, not thinking that it would necessarily be something that I would would have an impact on my career. But then, as luck would have it, and I'm happy to tell the tale of how that came about. But when I grew up, I wanted to be a sportscaster, so I was interested in radio, and radio was my path to the music industry.
So I always like to start at the beginning. So if you could tell us where you grew up and what kind of music were you listening to as you grew up?
I grew up in Hamden, Connecticut, just outside of New Haven. I The kind of music that would my parents would have in the house were basically Broadway soundtracks,
Okay.
the classic stuff from the 60s, The Sound of Music and all that kind of stuff. They didn't listen to music that much, but they had a good sound system.
Okay.
And so when I started to collect music myself, I had a good sound system to play it on. Of course, at first I was playing 45s in my room on one of those all-in-one turntable slash speaker things where the turntable sort of folded out of it. But once I got to albums and I was able to listen to them on the good system, it had a big impact on me. But it was really the local top 40 station that I listened to religiously, the late nights, the transistor radio under the pillow after lights out, as so many people of my age did. The transistor radio was our connection to the world. And there was a great top 40 station in New Haven. And I became so interested in the playlists of what they were playing that I would actually go. We had a market a block from my house where they sold like the top 20 singles in a
Mhm.
supermarket. But they would have the playlists from the local top 40 station, and all the music stores had them. And so I actually would go out of my way to get these printed playlists and look at them and want to know what these songs were. And to sum up that obsession with the radio, at age 12, I won two contests at that station by being the first one to call the station and identify the song. And it was a thrill not only to hear my name announced on the air as the winner, but you got to go down to the station to pick up the record, which was your prize. And so I could go down and look in the glass and see the DJs, and it was like, man, I want to do this.
I love that. What, when did you, like you talked about loving radio and the baseball. When did you start actually getting into this where you knew, you were going to do this for a living?
That comes in a bit later but
Okay.
in between those early radio experiences and when I actually go to college and get into radio, which I'll explain, I started going to concerts, big
Yeah.
concerts, and I saw everyone from the Beach Boys, the Young Rascals. I was in the third row the night the Doors played in New Haven and Jim Morrison was arrested on stage.
Wow.
I have great photos from that night, and the only video that exists of the arrest on stage was taken by my best friend who was sitting next to me.
Wow.
we were only 15 years old. We were in the third row, and you can see that on YouTube. And I saw the Stones at Madison Square Garden. I saw Cream's farewell tour. And this was all while I was still in high school. So now I was completely obsessed with music and not just the top 40, obviously. So,
Yeah, I can. Those are crazy.
yeah, so I go off to Brown University, and Brown University happens to have one of the earliest and most important progressive rock stations, WBRU FM,
Okay.
in Rhode Island, which has a signal that covers all of Rhode Island, not just a campus thing. And so in during my freshman year, I go up to the station to try out as a DJ. It didn't take me long to get on the air by my second semester. And for the next 4 years, I started as a DJ, continued doing shows for the all 4 years, but I became the music director and then program director of this very important station. We ended up being the number one FM station in Rhode Island. And so we were doted upon by the record companies because we had meaningful impact on the market in terms of music sales. And they would come down to the station, mostly from Boston, every week and pitch us on the new records. And it would be up to me as to what goes on the air. We played pretty much everything, but it was at that point, and now I'm at the point where I think you were asking about, is where I started thinking about, do I want to be in on the radio side of the business, or do I want to be on the record side of the business, which was very sexy to me. And I was quite often up in Boston at music industry events and concerts. I could go any concert I wanted to, any album I wanted was no cost to me. And so that's where it started. And by the time I got to the senior year of my at Brown, I had an offer to join Chess Janus Records, which was a sort of an odd combination of the classic Chess Records label, the famous blues and R&B label that recorded Muddy Waters and Chuck Berry and Etta James and Howlin' Wolf and all the classic blues artists, and Janus Records, which was a progressive rock British label where the all the music that was released on Janus was licensed from the UK and Europe. And it was my support of a young artist named Al Stewart that brought me to the attention of Janus Records. And I ended up joining Chess Janus in the fall of 74 and working most significantly on breaking Al Stewart, who broke in a big way with the song Year of the Cat.
I
But
remember that. Yes.
I had been playing Al Stewart's early records for years. And during that time, I also had a chance to work closely with Muddy Waters on one of his great sort of middle period albums called the Woodstock album, where he recorded an album with all the great Woodstock musicians, including members of the band. And that led to an offer to join Columbia Records. Now, but before I go on to that, so it's now I'll tie it into Bruce.
Okay. And if I could, I want to ask and I'm reading into this, but did you decide to go with the record company side versus the radio side because you wanted to influence and help push what gets shown on the radio?
Exactly.
Oh,
I wanted to be involved with promoting, marketing, and ultimately help signing and making
okay.
records with artists. That was the difference.
Okay, that
And
makes sense.
plus, a career in radio at that time meant typically you moved a lot.
Yeah.
You would work at a station and then you'd get hired to work at a bigger station in a different market. And it was it was that kind of a career for a young DJ.
Wow. Okay.
So
Yeah.
while
Okay.
I'm at Brown, And I'm going to see, at this point, I'm going to see Pink Floyd and the Allman Brothers and everyone, the Who and everybody else in the early 70s. But Bruce Springsteen's first album comes out. We loved it.
Mm.
We went right on the air with the first album. And because we were one of the first handful of stations to play the record, the early airplay he got was mostly in the Northeast. The Columbia Records guys brought Bruce to do a meet and greet at my station at WBRU. And so that's when I met Bruce for the first time.
Wow.
And the first record had been out not long, maybe a couple of months at the
Hmm.
most, I think. So it would have been somewhere in like in the late winter or spring of 73. And Bruce was so shy. Bruce was like a deer in the headlights. He was, it was really difficult to get him to really talk a whole lot. And I found out later, and I have no way of actually proving this, but I think it was might have been the first radio station that he'd ever actually set foot in. So that was just a meet and greet. And we didn't even go on the air for an interview because he was so kind of shy. So flash forward, second album comes out, same year, as you surely know.
Yeah.
And in the following spring, he's booked to play at Brown University in our big spring weekend of shows. And he's booked to play a midnight show. There was in the same hall at the university, the great jazz musician McCoy Tyner played at 8 o'clock. And was, Bruce went on at midnight. I stood there in this hall and my jaw dropped. I had never seen any, and I'd seen, as I told you, I'd seen a lot
Yeah,
of it.
exactly. Yeah.
My jaw dropped. The show opens with a single spotlight on Suki Lahav playing the violin intro to New York City Serenade. That's how they started the show.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, already I'm like, wow, what this is different. And on this little stage, which I've stood on many times since, because every time I go back to a reunion, I like to go to the hall, stand there, imagine the show, and there's usually no one there. And there was a mic stand there this past year. I went up to the stage and I stood at the mic, and it was just unforgettable. And so
Yeah.
he was, that was a Jekyll and Hyde moment for me. It was like, wait, how could this be the same guy? I could barely get to talk to me
Yeah.
a year earlier. So and I became obsessed with Bruce. And even before I ended up joining Columbia, which was about a year and a half later, I started following him around. I would go up and down the East Coast. I remember staying at Shockey's apartment in Philadelphia at WMMR's great Ed Shockey, who was a huge Bruce fan, staying at his apartment so we could drive down to Largo to see a show. And I desperately wanted to work for Columbia Records because of Bruce and Bob Dylan and Paul Simon and Santana and the 100 other amazing acts. And I was well known to Columbia, not only from the WBRU days, but from hanging around all their gigs. And then I got the offer to work for them.
Wow. It is when you think of the amount of I was watching the few years ago they had a Aretha Franklin biopic like
Hmm.
series and you're like, "Oh, John Hammond." And of course, I had to say to my family, he also signed Bruce.
And Stevie Ray Vaughan
Yeah, I
and
mean,
many others.
but when you think about that, if you had just signed one or two of those artists, right, you're like, oh, hey, you got it. I kind of joke around if Hank Williams had written only like one of his classics, right? You go, oh, what I think, I forgot who said it, but on the symposium, Thunder Road is a career. for some
Yeah. Oh,
artists.
yes. It was one of the writers, I think. That was a great quote. That was a great
Yeah,
quote.
it was a great quote. So you joined Columbia, and what did you start out doing?
Well, for instance, I was such a Bruce nut that when he played the bottom line in the release of Born to Run for 5 nights, 10 shows, I was at 5 or 6 of the shows. And famously, now it's famous, back famous just in a small circle. I would get a ticket to the early show. Either I bought it or I would get it from my friends at Columbia, and they would turn the house for the late show. And at least one night, I hid in the bathroom so I would not have to leave after the first show. I hid in the bathroom so I could stay for the second show. That's how much I just adored what he did. What he was doing at that moment was transcendent. And only a couple months later, they offered me a job as a product manager at Columbia, where I was the youngest product manager. And
And what is a product manager?
yeah, good question. The product manager was basically in charge of marketing for the artist, as product marketing manager. But under that umbrella includes overseeing packaging and the album cover and I mean, there were different departments within CBS or Columbia, that actual art department and production department, but it was the product manager that pulled all the pieces together and had responsibility for the budget. What was the package going to cost? What's the production going to cost? And then of course the marketing, radio, TV,
Mhm,
merchandising, posters, video, trade ads, all of that came under the product manager's responsibility to make it work within an
mhm,
overall budget. And so when I joined,
mhm.
I they I said, of course, I would love to work with Bruce Springsteen, and I met him a few years ago, and I've seen the many shows. And they said it turned out that the product manager that had been overseeing the Springsteen account was being promoted and was no, and so he turned it over to me. And I was able to work with Bruce and Elvis Costello's first 3 albums and Pink Floyd's Animals album and the first Nick Lowe album and many others that I oversaw the marketing of.
Wow. It, guess this is what is there an artist that surprised you that you weren't sure at first they were going to have a little something, and then as you got to know them, they blew you away?
Oh, maybe not so much in the Columbia era, but
Okay.
I went on to be a director of A&R at Epic Records and head of A&R at Polygram Records, and even after that as head of marketing at Arista Records. And you're always looking to develop artists over a at that time when an artist was signed, and when I later signed my own artists, you expected to that it would take 2 or 3 albums
Right.
to develop. No, you'd never expected to have a massive hit out of the box. When that happened, it was wonderful and amazing,
Yeah.
but it wasn't typically that. I look at Bruce, the first 2 albums were commercial failures,
Yeah.
and there are many other examples. Try to develop artists over time. So, for instance, when I was at Epic and I signed Amy Mann and her band Till Tuesday, never expected to have a top 10 single on the very first single and win the MTV award for Best New Artist of the Year and have the first tour be opening nationally for Hall and Oates. So sometimes it all falls into place. And then
Mhm.
other times it takes a lot longer.
The Let's talk about working with Bruce and helping to promote. So it was Darkness when it was the era you're working with him, correct?
That's when I had my hand on the wheel. The end of when I got hired, Born to Run had only been out for 3 months when I
Okay.
got hired. So I was not involved with the setup of that album at all, which is the great panel that was done at the symposium had all of my good friends who were there earlier than I was.
That was
Uh,
a great panel, right?
yeah, no,
I
those
love
are
that panel.
they're all good, still good friends 50 years later. And so I took over and I handled the support of Born to Run through the remainder of its tour, etc.
Okay.
And then when Bruce was touring between, as the lawsuit kept him from recording what turned out to be Darkness on the Edge of Town. So during those years when he couldn't record but could tour, I would be supporting all those shows with advertising, whether radio and print advertising, market by market. But then he gets to get in the
Yeah.
studio and record
If
Darkness.
if you don't mind, I've never thought about this, and I don't know if maybe there's nothing to discuss, but what is the record company feeling when you finally got lightning in the bottle? You finally got payoff, Born to Run. And I realize even then it wasn't this smash commercial, right? Because I think The River was the first one that kind of broke through mainstream and got radio play. But you guys, you've got some momentum, and then everything stops because of the lawsuit. What is the feeling of Columbia at that time?
Obviously, concern that so much time is going by because in the sequence of album releases was typically no less than one a year at that
Yeah.
time. As you may know, in the 60s, it was most artists were contracted to put out two albums a year.
Yeah, I was amazed when I in 1977 I discovered the Beach Boys. I was late to the
Mm.
dance. Endless Summer is where I discovered Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. And going back and looking, you're like, God, they're putting out two, three
Uh,
albums a year.
I know. It was crazy. The record labels would just pump them out. And even in 73, Bruce puts out two albums in the same year.
Yeah, I that is it, and it just seems strange now because it's so weird. It's going to be weird this year. We got tracks two, and then only 3 or 4 months later, we're getting Nebraska. But now
Oh,
yeah,
that's
that's because of circumstances, because of the movie.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So during those years, there was great concern that the clock was ticking. But there was the, and what Walter Yetnikoff, who was running CBS Records, was able to assist with Bruce's legal bills
Mhm.
to try to get the lawsuit completed as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But it still took that I can't remember, and it lasted quite a long time, and then they couldn't even start recording until that was done. And as Bruce's recording process at that time was over recording massively and then
Yes.
deciding what songs would go on. And at the power station, there were mountains and mountains of tapes, mountains of tapes. And so and during that time, I would occasionally see Bruce at some event or another. Actually, Mike Pilot, who you saw on that panel, took he and I took Bruce to a Yankee game during that time with Steven. And they'd been already out of, it's already 2 years since Born to Run came out. And so he's
Mhm.
out of the public eye. And he'd shaved his beard. And Mike and I took Bruce and Steven on the subway to Yankee Stadium, and nobody recognized him. And then even when we're sitting in the seats, only one or two people came over in the course of the game that say,
Mhm.
"Is that Bruce?"
Yeah.
That it was. My point being that he was out of the public eye. So the answer to your question, there was great concern.
Good. Thank you.
Th- Then I get the call to come over to the studio to listen to the Darkness album, which is finally completed. And the only other person that was in the room from CBS was a gentleman named Mickey Eichner, who ran the A&R department at the
Okay.
time. And it was just Jimmy and John playing back the album. And I, again, it was just a moment of pure revelation because in a minute, even after hearing the first song, I knew this was not Born to Run Part Two.
Yes.
And it just got harder and edgier. And through the whole album, I realized that this was a whole nother, this was just a complete reinvention, if you will, of who Bruce Springsteen is as a narrator, right? Those
Yeah.
first three albums are lots of street stories, lots of some of which are from his perspective and some of which are from others'
Yeah.
characters' perspective. And now Darkness is about real life. Darkness is about what's happening in the late 70s in this on the streets in his world. And it's tough and it's really hard and factories are closing.
Yeah.
And so I walked out of there that day knowing that it was going to be me that was going to be going back to the big Columbia Records and everyone that's waiting for what in their minds they hoped was going to be the sequel to Born to Run, to tell them this is completely different. And I have the letter that I wrote to the entire company explaining how this album is going to be different and it's going to be have to be promoted differently and imaging is going to be different. And to that effect, I went to LA during the mastering period when they were trying to get the and last decisions on what songs to put on and off. I went out to LA with Andrea Klein, who was the art director for Darkness. And Bruce and I went to lunch by ourselves, just the two of us. They always stayed at the Sunset Marquee. And we went to this great diner on Sunset, which is still there. And he said to me, Dick, if it were up to me, I would like this album to come out with no promotion ahead of time. Like just it appears in the stores one day. He felt so overhyped on Born to Run. And oddly enough, here years later now, many decades later, you can do that. Beyonce put out a record once that no one knew was coming until the day it came out a few years ago. But I said that's not possible because
Yeah.
we have to promote the retailers in order for them to make their stock buy the records to put in
Yeah.
the store, etc. And so I said what we ended up doing, it was a long conversation, but at the end of the day, I agreed and I kept my word that all advertising would include no copy except for his name and the name of the album and the release date. And it could say the new album, Darkness on the Edge of Town,
Yeah.
June 2nd, 1978. And that's what we did, and including in television ads that we ran on Saturday Night Live. And then I also got a letter from Bruce's attorney, which I still have, which goes through point by point what has to be approved by Bruce or management,
Wow.
and which was all good.
I was going to ask, was there anything unusual or
Just that it was he was now taking control of all packaging and imaging, and that it was because up to Born to Run, it was what the record company wanted.
yes.
And you heard that the Eric Miola photo session was not ordered by the record company. Who knows what the cover would have been if Eric Miola hadn't befriended Bruce and convinced him to do a photo session. And then and so far as we wanted to make a video,
Mm.
and at that time, Bruce was hesitant about making any video, and but he agreed to do a live shoot, which we shot like the day after the Roxy show. And actually, before I talk about that, the Roxy show was one of the broadcasts, and you heard Michael Pilot and Paul Rappaport in Monmouth talking about how critical the live broadcasts were. They arranged for live broadcasts in 5 regions of the country, and they were enormously successful in exposing how great Bruce's performance was to so many people who either hadn't seen him or he never played their market or couldn't get a ticket, and they were hugely and they became the greatest bootlegs.
Yeah, and why is that? Because it is hard for me to put my mind around it as someone who, as I said, I graduated high school in 77. I was an AM radio kid. I just I don't understand it was why it made so many people that it was a conversion moment. It was a road to Damascus moment for them.
Because it was freaking exciting. This show, listen, the gateway to
Yeah.
becoming a Bruce fan was always the live show
Yes, I
from
do
day
feel
one,
that. Yes.
from day one. And by 78, that band was they were every night. Prove It All Night was, and I was at least 25 of the shows on the 78 tour, including a
Okay.
number of the broadcasts. Every night was like it was going to be the last night they were ever going to play.
Yeah.
This was before the band expanded. No, there were no backup singers, and Nils hadn't joined the band yet. Once he might have brought out the horns for special occasions once or twice, but it was just as hard and tight as you could ever want it. Plus, he was playing material from all 3 albums, plus great selection of oldies that he would mix in depending on the show. One show he opened with Rave On,
Yeah.
and he would mix them in as he back then. It was just every show was incredible, and so hearing it live was the next best thing to being there.
One of the things that I was struck by when a couple of years ago when they sold the No Nukes comic, they took those 2 days and put them in one film, was how small the band looks. Because even now, not the E Street Orchestra that we have this last tour, but even when the River Part 2, because of Susie, because of Niels and Steven, and that it just is a lot bigger band.
Yeah,
And that's called the stripped down E Street Band, modern band. But when you look at that, when you see him on stage, you're like, wow, there's just not that many people.
I'll go to my grave believing that was Bruce's greatest tour. And they would do 2 sets back then.
Yeah.
And so the shows would go for a long time, and it was just really special.
Yeah,
Really
it really
special.
is. All
Oh,
right.
so we get
Yeah.
up to
So,
the video is really important part of the
mm,
conversation because the rest of the world still hadn't seen him except for London.
yeah.
And one of the ways that you could promote an artist at that point in time around the rest of the world is to make a live video. The music videos, as we come to know them from MTV, were still rare, except they were being made in the UK, but not much in the US. UK
Yeah.
was ahead of us. But a live video can be really important, especially for an act that's so essential to see live.
Yeah.
And before we shot the videos for Darkness, it was proven by another CBS artist, Meatloaf. The live video for Paradise by the Dashboard Light was hugely important to exposing Meatloaf around the world. And so that was a precursor to what we wanted to do with Bruce. So he agrees to shoot in Phoenix, and we, due to expense, we did not shoot the entire show. I wish we could have.
Yeah.
But we shot 4 or 5 songs, including 3 songs from the new album. I think it was 3:
Hmm.
Badlands, Promised Land. And I forgot whether there's what the third song was, if there even was a third song. And then Born to Run and Rosie. And Bruce had never done a show with cameras in his face,
And he,
except in London.
right.
But that was like this was multicam. This
Hmm.
was a lot more sophisticated than what Barry shot. And at the end of the day, at the end of the show, as you famously know, girls jumped on stage, got past the what limited security there was, and
Yes.
basically tackled him
Yes.
and kissed him. And ever since that day, anybody that ever knows me and knows that I was there and said that was rehearsed. No, it definitely, most definitely was
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
And but he ended up only agreeing to putting that video out. So we didn't have any video of the songs from Darkness on the Edge of Town, but it still did its job of exposing a
Yeah.
live Springsteen performance to the world. And to shortly thereafter, after the video came out, I got called by ABC Television, actually the producers of a show that was being made for ABC Television called Heroes of Rock and Roll. It was prime time, like 2 or 3 hour special about the heroes of rock and roll.
Hmm.
And this is like I'm saying sometime in the fall of 78. And they asked for that video for the show. And they also wanted the Pump It Up video by Elvis Costello. Because
Yeah.
that year, I was going back and forth between the Costello tour and the Springsteen tour.
Wow. Talk
Um,
about a great time.
yeah. And so I said, and of course, I had everything had to be approved by Landau, of course, on behalf of Bruce. But I said to them, you can only have the Springsteen video if it closes the special. That it has to end the special.
Right.
And they did finally agree to that. So somewhere on YouTube, you can probably find it. But that was the first time that video was shown on national TV, on ABC television, which, as there were only 3 networks back then.
Yes.
So that was another big breakthrough to show Bruce to the world in the Darkness period.
Do Bruce, when they were promoting the No Nukes, he talked about how he felt uncomfortable being filmed, that he felt like it, if you see how the magic trick is done, you may lose something. So, how much did you have to push him to let you do this?
I don't remember the process so much because Arnold Levine, who was our in-house
Yeah.
video producer, really was on point for how it was
Hmm.
going to work. And but I know he was nervous. And the fact that he didn't want any of the other videos, including the ones from the current album released, means he felt like it wasn't loose enough, or
Yeah.
there was something that was too stiff about it. And those videos stayed in the can from 1978 until the Darkness box set in 2010 or whatever year it came out.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Mm.
That's a long time for those to stay in the Thrill
Mm.
Hill archives. I was just glad they finally came out because I had copies of them.
Yeah. The I want to go back to a little bit of I like the idea that Bruce did not give Born to Run Part 2. He didn't do Darkness Part 2. As both a professional and as a fan, do you I don't feel like Bruce repeats himself very often. That he always there may be some similar sounds, but each album explores a new theme and it is unique in what perspective. What's your feeling about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think he's very consciously
Yeah.
tried not to repeat himself. And yeah, there are albums that have a similar sound based on the instrumentation. There are a number of albums that have the sort of synthesizer sounds of the late 80s and early 90s and whatever, that they do typically have a different point of view and sometimes really significant, like the From Born to Run to Darkness is one of those really significant ones, or Tunnel of Love, which is still one of my favorite albums, was
It
a
is me too. I
very
adore that
significant,
album.
totally significant
Yeah.
change where suddenly it's a whole album about marriage and relationships that are very personal to him, not just
Yeah.
observing third parties.
Yeah. Did were you this is a broader term, but what talk about juggling the I'm a fan to I'm a professional. And I guess there are times when you're promoting someone that at the time you didn't care particularly for their music, but it was still your job. Can you talk a little bit about that, Dick?
Yeah, I had to do that.
And you don't have to name names, so
No,
I don't
I had
want,
to
okay.
no, I had to do that early in my career as a promotion man at Chess Janus Records, and I named a number of the artists that I was a product marketing manager for that I was still proud of helping to launch them. But there were others that I was handed that were signed by somebody in the A&R department that I was like, okay, this might be tough.
That's very sweet of the way you say that.
And they listen, A&R, I did A&R for 10 years. It's a really hard job. And no, it's like baseball. If you could even hit 300 as an A&R, if you have three
Yeah.
big hits out of 10, you're a fucking star. But not everything's going to work. And sometimes it doesn't work just because at that point in time, you couldn't get it played on the radio, which
Mm.
was critical. Or in the 80s, you couldn't get it on MTV, or it just wasn't that good to begin
Yeah.
with. There wasn't a song that you could hang your hat on. Yes, there were times, and frankly, I've forgotten most of them.
So, Dick,
And
why?
then there were also times where I was really shocked that it wasn't bigger.
Yeah.
I signed Garland Jeffries after he was on A&M Records.
Okay.
And one of the great artists I've ever worked with. And I made 3 albums with him, but we never were able to get all the way through to superstardom. There's a fantastic documentary that just came out on Garland Jeffries, and you'll hear Bruce talk about how he's one of the great writers and artists that he's ever
Yeah.
known. Yeah, I can't say enough about it. And it just we never got it over the hump. I did executive produce his best-selling album of his career, but it wasn't a smash.
Yeah. I in the late 80s, I became friends with a lady named Sarah Hickman, who was signed by Elektra and did a couple albums, got released, and she's ended up having a career, self-published albums and independent labels. And I just think she's an amazing songwriter and an amazing person, but it just never lightning struck. John Hyatt's had a great career, but he's certainly not a household name. But
No, but
respect,
but he's been able to toured successfully for
Yeah.
decades and decades, and just a great and had great hits by other people
Yes.
of his songs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some fantastic hits that he wrote that
Yeah.
got covered by other people.
Yeah. When I'm going to see I'm With Her tonight, and they had done a great version of Crossing Muddy Waters. And one of my other podcasts is we're going through every John Hyatt song in alphabetical order. And when someone asks about him, I go, you won't know his name, but you'll know some of his songs.
Yeah, last year or earlier this year during Grammy week, there was a tribute to John Hyatt in Los Angeles where all these great artists got up on stage and performed his songs, and it was really impressive.
Were you there?
Yeah.
Oh, I watched it on TV. Please tell me a little bit about that night, if you
Oh,
don't
it
mind.
was at the famous Troubadour, and Little Feat were played, and Tom Morello played. You wouldn't have thought of him.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't connect
It-
them together.
yeah, it was just a great night. That was a tribute to John. And they do that every year now during Grammy Week. There's a troubadour on the troubadour stage. They do a tribute to a writer slash artist. I think the year before was Paul Simon.
Okay.
And so now that I've been to one of those, I'm, I've, I'm not going to miss it.
My co-host has an acquaintance with Nancy Hyatt, John's wife.
Oh,
And she shared that when Lily was up there singing, there was a lot of pride from her and John. So that's amazing.
listen,
Uh,
I love Riding with the King is still my
oh,
all-time favorite.
it is it you know what's interesting, Dick, and maybe you can give your theory, is one of the things we do for the podcast is we make a playlist of all the covers of the song we're discussing that week, right? Memphis in the Meantime, or the unoriginal sin that Willie Nelson covered. And we often wonder why some songs hit where people love to cover them and then other songs don't.
Yeah.
Do you have any what is your theory on that?
The theory is that they're universal,
Yeah,
that they just are they're great songs and that they fit the profile of the singer.
yeah,
Another artist who a lot of his songs are better known by other artists is Warren Zevon.
yes,
Linda Ronstadt made some of Warren Zevon's songs much more famous than he did.
yeah,
Or Jules Shear with the Bangles hits.
yeah,
If she knew what she wants. And Jules is great. I talked to him not long ago, and he's actually made a new record. But his records never sold anywhere close
yeah.
to the artists that covered his songs.
I've kept you a while, so I don't want to keep you too long, but why did you decide to leave Columbia?
That's a good question. It was simply because I wanted to be in A&R. I wanted to sign acts
Okay.
and make records. And I wanted to do that ideally at Columbia, but there was no opening for me at Columbia. And I was offered an A&R position at Epic, and it was a chance to reinvent myself, which I have done so many times over the course of my career. Going into the tech space, I walked away from a senior VP job at a major label to join a startup tech company in 1997. Nobody had done that yet. The company was
Yeah.
called Liquid Audio, and we were the pioneer in digital music, and we went public in 1999. But so I've had no problem reinventing myself and walking out of one door and through another. But A&R was a passion of mine. And so I had the chance to do that. And it was really hard to leave working with Bruce and Elvis Costello.
Yeah.
And because I had spent so much time and effort on those artists for years. And I remember the last night that I saw Bruce before I was changing was at the end of the 78 tour, almost the end. It was the closing at in San Francisco at Bill Graham's venue that was closing. He was closing it down at the end of the year. I'm suddenly blanking on it. Not the Fillmore, Winterland.
Okay.
It was the last few weeks of Winterland, and Bruce did two shows. And Bill Graham had a party up in the hills of San Francisco at his house, a post-show party, which went way into the night. And that was the night I told Bruce that I was leaving to take this A&R job, and he could not have been more embracing. God, what a great opportunity, and we'll miss you. God bless, and all the best of luck. And I had tears in my eyes through the whole show, thinking this is the last night I'm going to see
Yeah.
Bruce, where I'm actually involved
Yeah.
directly. And so it was an emotional night. It was an emotional night.
Yeah. I always ask this, just I'm going to ask you a couple of fan questions. The amount of times you've seen an artist perform is not a barometer of how big of a fan you are, but have you counted how many times you've seen him?
No,
Too many,
no,
right?
no, I have no idea.
Okay.
To be honest, in recent years, I usually only see a couple of shows.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm seeing a lot of shows since back in the day, but I did see a lot of shows on the river.
Okay.
And if I can tell one last story,
Sure, please.
so it was only a few months after I was only just somewhat, I can't remember the timing. I was working, I guess it must have been in the spring of 79, I think it was. So
Okay.
I'm no longer actually hands-on with Bruce. I think I'm in the early days at Epic, but I'm not sure of the timing, except that Robin Williams, who I had met before he became a TV star, when he
Hmm.
was a comedian, I'd met him in Aspen, Colorado, and gotten to know him. My brother had introduced me to him, and that's a story you don't need to know, except that I'd met him, and we
Okay.
actually we skied together in Aspen a run or two, and he had the Mork and Mindy suspenders, but they were his suspenders.
Oh,
Like
how funny.
he brought that to Mork and Mindy, the rainbow suspenders. Anyway, he's now like 2 years later, he's now a big TV star. He's signed to Casablanca Records, and he's recording his first album live in New York at the Copacabana nightclub. He's recording 2 or 3 nights there. And I get to see him afterwards, and we're just, hey, what you up to? And I said, I'm working really closely with Bruce Springsteen, or I just had been working closely with Bruce Springsteen. I can't remember exactly when it was. And he said, I'd really like to meet him.
Mm.
And so Barry Bell, who was Bruce's agent, and I took Robin Williams and his then wife, Vicky, down to Bruce's farmhouse
Oh,
to meet for Robin to meet Bruce, and it was an incredible day. There's no photos. If there's one moment in my career that I wish there was a photo, it would be
yes.
of the day that Robin and I and Barry went down to Bruce's house.
Wow.
And
I,
Bob Chermside, yeah, so he cooked us all a meal, and there's he and I talk about it every so often, and
wow. I mean, yes, I'd want a film, but also a picture, but also what a special memory.
yeah, it was
Yeah,
amazing.
that's great.
And Bruce had hurt himself that day. He was on a three-wheeler on the grounds of his
Okay.
farm with his girlfriend at the time was a young actress named Joyce Heiser
Okay.
during most of the Darkness tour. And they were riding in and they sideswiped a tree
Mm,
and he injured his leg like right before we came. So
yeah.
he was in some distress and he had his leg up to keep, I
Mm,
think he had ice
yeah.
on his leg. And
Wow.
after we left, Bob told me the next day, he said, after you left, we went right to the ER to
Wow.
have him checked out. Yeah. And he was injured enough that He had to stay off of it for a while.
Mm.
So he muscled through that day with Robin.
And I think of Robin doing Elmer Fudd doing Fire, you know?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm driving in my car.
Yes. This was so much fun. If you don't mind, I end every podcast with what I call a Mary question. And what this is, Jay Armstrong, who was an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area, he's now retired, but he would give his students the lyrics to Thunder Road, and they would treat it as if it was a poem. He
Mhm.
would discuss it comparing to Robert Frost and other American poets, and he would ask his class at the end, do you think Mary gets in the car? So, Dick, do you think Mary gets in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
I've always thought she got in the car. Like yeah, to me, she's getting in that car. It's the hope that, and Bruce talked about at Monmouth a few weeks ago, and he was so forthcoming
Yes.
about his writing process.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And we talked about always, it's always this yin and the yang that
Yes.
when he's writing, it's sometimes it's really dark. And Nebraska would be the obvious the darkest moment of his career in terms of recordings. But there's most of the time there's hope that is sprinkled in,
Yes.
with the darkness. And you could go through you could do a whole course just on evaluating those two emotions in his canon.
It truly can it? Dick, this was so much fun. Thank you so much. Thank you for all you do for Pantheon. We are so glad you're part of our family. And anytime you want to come back and share stories, please let me know. I
Oh, thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, that's really nice of you to say. There are more stories.
Okay.
So we'll leave it for another time.
Any final thoughts before I let you go?
Just that I'm looking forward to the box set, the second box set this year,
Yes.
and the fact that he told Rolling Stone this week that there will be a Tracks 3.
Yes.
So I love what he said in one of his interviews recently, where he said, where they asked him, I said, now, why now are you doing all this stuff? He said, because I'm old.
And I have a theory that he wants to see people enjoying it. I think he wants to do this. And so I think and also a chance for him to explain why perhaps he didn't release it or why he did that versus 50 years from now where they're releasing it and it's out of context.
Yeah. And I'll give you one example of that. After Darkness had its run, and he's recording for The River, John
Yeah.
Landau. And I go over to John Landau's apartment, and he said, I got to play you one song that Bruce just recorded. And he plays me Roulette, and my mind is blown.
Yeah.
It's totally, absolutely blown. Oh my God. And I just assumed 100% that would be on the
Yeah.
river. But of course it wasn't. And that's one for the ages, if you ask me. That, when you think about the songs that have been left off,
Yeah.
that The Promise, Roulette, and Because the Night are probably the three that I think of first.
Yeah. That you just go, wow.
Yeah.
Just wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Dick, thank you so much.
All
Have a
right.
great weekend. We'll do
Yep.
this again sometime. All right.
Thank you.
I'll send
Thank
you an email. We'll figure out some time maybe in January. Let's catch up. All right.
Okay. And thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, buddy. Talk to you soon. Bye
Take
bye.
care. Bye.